Search.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back yet again to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed the first two segments. I know I have, especially with Death Reaper's comment about his fantasy teams. Like I said, if you are still watching Death Reaper, good luck to you and your fantasy exploits. I think you have a very solid team. Maybe looking at the bench a little bit, you might want to bolster. But overall, you have a very solid team. Let's get back into our deep dives of certain skill position groups, especially in the AFC, because that's where all of the running back situations are very contentious. And this next team might be the most contentious one of all, because of their new head coach, because of their perhaps new philosophies on the offensive side of the ball, and because of these two guys they brought in, replacing a guy in Austin Eckler who has had and been one of the more solid pieces in that LA Chargers offense for the past couple of years. But the way they profile now, this could very well be one of the more surprising at year's end running back rooms in the league. So without further ado, let's talk about the LA Chargers running back situation. Now, why are they called the Ravens of the West? Well, because they just got two Ravens running backs. And what it means for the Chargers to get these two guys like this is what Jim Harbaugh is all about. His philosophy is running the football. Hey, it's what won Michigan the national title. Running the football, being more physical than the other guys. It may take a couple of years to take its true effect, but that seems to be the direction that this Chargers team is going in. But Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, let's talk about them a little bit, because they as well aren't necessarily quote-unquote superstars. But they worked so well in the Ravens offense because of the way their committee approach with these guys really supplemented what Baltimore wanted to do, while with the whole kind of spread option aspect of their offense with Lamar and them all over there. But now they're LA Chargers. It's going to be interesting to see how Jim Harbaugh uses them in his offensive setup. Let's talk about Gus Edwards first, because I think that he's projected to be the starter as well. Maybe has less injury concerns than J.K. Dobbins. We'll talk about those in a second. But last year, as Tap to Learn says, always liked Gus Edwards over Dobbins, but Edwards can't stay on the field. Well, we'll talk about both of them in terms of their injury histories, because Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, as much as I love them on the Ravens, and as much as their committee approach could work for the Chargers, it's all about in their injury history. But they still have decent numbers to kind of combat and mitigate for what they don't bring when they're out. Let's talk about Gus Edwards first. 810 yards on 198 carries last year, 13 TDs, 4.1 yards per carry. So as you can see, perhaps more of a red zone guy as well. Kind of like if Audric Estime were a couple years down the road, let's say. But Gus Edwards, what I love about him is he's not always going to have pretty numbers. He's going to have ugly numbers, but he gets those numbers by hard work and physicality. It's not necessarily going to be pretty in terms of fantasy if you are looking for a Chargers running back, let's say. But at the end of the day, if he stays healthy, like Tap to Learn did bring up and allude to, he will always be one of those guys with a high volume of scoring, perhaps a lot of touches in this Chargers offense. And with their new head coach and with their head coach's philosophies in turn, it could work magic on the football field. But let's also talk about J.K. Dobbins, because he brings a lot as well if he stays healthy, because I think that out of both of them, he has more of the injury history. J.K. Dobbins, to kind of bolster that comment I just made about his injury history, of the 67 games he was eligible for, missed 43 of them. He has had 13 career games of double-digit carries, so make of that what you will. Very few considering how many games he was eligible for, how many games he missed, and most importantly, what kind of value he brought to the Baltimore Ravens, both by being there, but by also being injured. He does average 6.2 yards per carry last year, 9 rushing touchdowns as well. So both of them, if anything, bring production. That's what they are going to bring in this Chargers running back room. But let's talk about how the Chargers might want to use them because of their lack of depth elsewhere. Because when I think of the Chargers and I think about who they have in certain positions, it certainly feels like there could be opportunities if they wanted to use Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins in more kind of varied ways. Gus Edwards could be a receiving back. Who knows? J.K. Dobbins could be more of the power back once he comes back from injury. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is the Chargers may not be the most exciting team on offense, but they certainly are starting to have a plan that can really work should Jim Harbaugh implement it correctly. I like what they did with the offensive line. Drafting Joe Alt to kind of bookend Rashawn Slater, one of the best tackles in the league. And they still have Justin Herbert, and they still have his arm talent, strength, and accuracy. Now, there has to be a kind of balance here, because you can't necessarily not use Justin Herbert and expect him to be happy about it, because there will be moments where Justin Herbert may have to throw the football. And you might not be as confident if you're Jim Harbaugh in the weapons you have, but I still think that you can't necessarily overlook what Justin Herbert brings to the table. So now that you have this kind of committee approach, you now have to start thinking about, well, how do these guys coming in really fit what A, my offense wants, and B, what Justin Herbert wants. Because when I think about the Ravens, there's way more opportunities for the running game to feature prominently. I'm not saying that's not going to be the case for the Chargers this year, but I'm just saying that the Ravens were very wide open and variable in how they ran the football. The Chargers haven't necessarily been. They've really kind of relied upon Justin Herbert to work his magic. But I don't necessarily think that will work in a Jim Harbaugh system, mainly because of how these two running backs change things. Because if they stay healthy, they really provide not necessarily a depth, but they provide a certain aura of physicality that the Chargers might want to preach in the future. And so, getting Justin Herbert to that level as someone who's seen as more of a gunslinging quarterback, that's going to be kind of a challenge. And not for nothing, but out of all the running back rooms that I did mention, this one has a certain sameness to it. Because Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, more often than not, were asked to kind of do similar things in the Ravens' backfield. And while in a Jim Harbaugh setting that worked wonders in Michigan, will it work if the overarching sentiment of the offense has always been have Justin Herbert control it, and then, things will come together. But this year is going to look very different. And Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, as Shepsy's Sweet Spot says, Harbaugh's definitely a run-heavy system. Look at his number one pick. O-line, very big in his mind. I completely agree with that sentiment. I think that it's all going to come down to how Harbaugh implements these new guys in the O-line and how he implements Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins. Because if Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins are solid, then that really does open up a lot more for Justin Herbert to exploit. And while he might not be throwing with the same volume as he had in the Brandon Staley era, he's still going to get opportunities down the field. And even though a lot of people don't necessarily like this Chargers wide receiver core, it still has a lot of upside to it. I still like Quentin Johnson as a vertical threat, Ladd McConkey as a high-intelligence receiver, and also Joshua Palmer, very intelligent in his own right as well. So the Chargers offense definitely is going to be one to monitor very closely. But going back to Edwards and Dobbins, these are two guys, like I said. And like I said, with every single one of these running back groups, they're not going to start on your fantasy football team. But if you want a lot of production, perhaps more production you might expect out of someone who's not necessarily in a high-end tier, then Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins can be that for you. But like Shep Easy Sweet Spot and Tap to Learn has said, as Sticker, another Rate My Team. Fantastic. Keep these kind of comments coming. Before we go to break, I will definitely look into this team sticker. Lamar, Jahmyr Gibbs, James Cook, a guy who I have, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Smith, Travis Kelce, DK Metcalf, Dallas defense. I believe that is Justin Tucker as your kicker. Got Zamir White, I believe, and T. Higgins on the bench. If Chase doesn't play, do I put T or DK as my flex? And this is also a fantastic team. Lamar, can't go wrong. Dual threat quarterback, that's what you're looking for. Gibbs as well. Gibbs is in kind of that second tier you might have looked at in the second round. I really like, but then James Cook is someone who I'm on the fence about this year. I liked him last year, but it's all going to come down to how Josh Allen feels in this new system. But I do think that he is going to be a make or break kind of player. He has a lot of boom or bust potential. Then obviously you have big guys in Tyreek Hill and Devontae Smith as your wide receivers, both really projected to have decent seasons. Travis Kelce as well, kind of that old guard sentiment in terms of the tight end, but he still has a lot of value. I think that there's going to be a lot more options for Patrick Mahomes in that Chiefs offense, but Travis Kelce will always be his number one for as long as he stays there. And DK, I love DK. Always in that wide receiver 15 to 20 range. Always gets you a lot of balance in your team, 10 to 15 points. And the Dallas D, perhaps top 3, top 5 defense in the league. Zamir White, I love this guy. A lot of people have been sleeping on him and T. Higgins. Now that he's franchise tagged, all that conundrum is over with on your bench. But the big question that you bring up, if Chase doesn't play, do I put T or DK as my flex? For the time being, I actually like DK a little bit more than T. Higgins. I think that when you look at the Seattle offense, I think that yes, they want to be more inclusive, and it's going to be a lot more variety now that Ryan Grubb is their offensive coordinator. But DK just brings something so unexpected to the wide receiver position. This real physicality at the catch point that really stands out amongst wide receivers. And he's not necessarily, the highest end tier 3 or so wide receiver, but he is someone who I appreciate, and this is not just my Seattle bias coming in. I really think that DK, you can't go wrong with. T. Higgins, I like, but I still think Jamar Chase will be the guy. And like I said, talking about the Bengals running back room, they also add a lot of variability to this offense early on. And point being, the Seattle schedule early on is kind of light in my opinion. They open up with Denver and New England, which should be two teams that they can really exploit. You can really get to see what the offense looks like. So for the time being, I'm more excited about DK as a flex option. But that being said, T. Higgins could still be valued. It's just that tenuous kind of contract debate really gives me pause about what T. Higgins' season could look like. But overall, I really like your team. I would give it kind of an A-, I think. I think you have a little bit of a deeper bench than what Death Reaper had. And I think that your depth at the wide receiver position is really going to help you. Maybe in the future, if you want to do some trades as well, have a lot of trade value. And you have guys on my bench who are going a little bit underrated in terms of how they're appreciated in the fantasy market. So overall, thank you for the comment. Like I said to Death Reaper, good luck on your fantasy exploits this year, sticker. But that being said, I do think that your team might be a little bit more of a value team. As he says, my second wide receiver is Davante Adams. I'm a Seahawks fan as well. Can't wait for the season with Grubb. I subbed and liked, by the way. Thank you so much. I'm always looking out for my fellow Seahawks fans. I hope we have a good season too. Let me know what you think in later episodes. Sticker as you become a fan of this show. Thank you again for your comment as well. Davante Adams, I think he's going to have a great year. Also someone who had a little bit of tension for the Las Vegas Raiders last year. If you watched receiver, I know I did, there was a lot of tension there. But I still think at the end of the day, he's a value receiver. But thank you so much, Sticker. Go Hawks. Go Hawks. But that will just take us to break. Coming up next, we transition from our deep dives into skill position groups around the league into our last of the sleepers and bust with our tight ends. Should be some good segments coming up. We'll be right back after the break.